The wind howled through the testing facility of Skyward Aerospace. Jet engines roared in the distance, fuel fumes thick in the air. Jason Reed knelt on the concrete floor, scrubbing a stubborn fuel stain with steady hands. His back ached, but he'd learned to work through the pain years ago. Above him, a procession of executives passed along the steel catwalk, dark suits and polished shoes traversing the sky while he remained earthbound. Among them walked Rebecca Morgan, the 32-year-old CEO, her heels clicking like gunshots against the metal. She paused at the railing, looking down. Her gaze settled on Jason with the casual indifference of someone observing an insect. "Careful there." Her voice sliced through the mechanical din. "Don't let your hands touch something you're not qualified to understand. Jets aren't for people who only know how to mop floors." Laughter erupted around her, the practiced chuckles of subordinates. Jason remained still, his eyes lifting toward the gleam of the experimental fighter jet behind the glass partition, the place where he once belonged. He returned to his work, shoulders squared against the weight of memories heavier than any aircraft. Rebecca Morgan continued her tour, but her words lingered in the air like exhaust. 6 months ago, she had inherited Skyward Aerospace when her father died of a heart attack in his corner office. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly convinced that weakness had no place in the Scorned. The board of directors watched her every move, waiting for her to stumble, to prove that a woman in her early 30s couldn't fill her father's shoes. So she became harder, colder. She fired underperformers without hesitation, cut budgets that didn't show immediate returns, and built walls around herself so high that even her own reflection felt like a stranger. To Rebecca, the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who flew and those who fell. And once you fell, you didn't deserve to look up. Jason finished his shift as the sunset painted the hangar in shades of amber and gold. He changed out of his uniform in the small employee locker room, wincing as he pulled his shirt over his head. The scars on his back, a roadmap of surgeries and skin grafts, pulled tight across his muscles. 35 now, but the injuries made him feel decades older. He drove home in a 12-year-old pickup truck, the radio playing low as the suburban landscape of Northern Virginia rolled by. The modest apartment complex where he lived was a far cry from the officer housing he'd once occupied, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, within his budget. As he climbed the stairs to the third floor, the day's fatigue weighed on him. But when he opened the door, 8-year-old Emma launched herself into his arms, all pigtails and enthusiasm, clutching a sheet of paper. "Daddy, look what I drew today." The exhaustion vanished from Jason's face, replaced by a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Let me see Firefly." He studied the drawing, an impressively detailed sketch of an aircraft. Not a child's scribble, but a thoughtful rendering with control surfaces and proper proportions. "This is amazing. Where did you learn to draw planes like this?" Emma beamed her missing front tooth, giving her smile a mischievous quality. "I listen when you tell me bedtime stories. And I borrowed a book from the school library." She pointed to various parts of the drawing. "This is the vertical stabilizer, and these are the ailerons, right?" Jason felt something crack open in his chest, pride mingled with melancholy. His daughter was smart, too smart sometimes. She absorbed everything like a sponge, especially anything related to flight. "That's exactly right. You've got a good eye." Mrs. Kaplan, the elderly neighbor who watched Emma after school, appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "She's been drawing planes all afternoon. Barely touched her homework." Jason nodded gratefully. "Thanks for watching her, Mrs. K. I appreciate it." After Mrs. Kaplan left, Jason heated up leftovers for dinner. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with furniture that had seen better days. But photos covered the walls. Jason in his flight suit, standing proudly beside his F-16. Jason and Amanda, Emma's mother, laughing on their wedding day. Amanda holding newborn Emma in the hospital, her smile tired but radiant. Life before everything changed. Across town, Rebecca Morgan sat alone in her corner office, the lights of Washington, D.C., glittering below like a circuit board. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her father, Charles Morgan, his stern face looking into the camera with the confidence of a man who had built an empire. She traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip. "I won't let it fall apart, Dad." The whisper felt too loud in the empty room. Her hand clenched around the military contract documents, a potential $2 billion deal that would secure Skyward's future for the next decade. The same contract that was now threatened by technical issues with the prototype fighter. Rebecca had grown up watching her father command rooms negotiate billion-dollar contracts, shake hands with generals and senators. He taught her that respect was earned through dominance, that sympathy was weakness, dressed in pretty words. When he collapsed at his desk clutching his chest, she wasn't there. She was in Tokyo closing a deal. She flew home to an empty office and a legacy she wasn't sure she could carry. The funeral was private. The press conference was flawless. And every night since she stood in front of the mirror practicing her father's expression, the one that said nothing could break her. But something already had. Rebecca's phone chimed with a message from the head engineer about tomorrow's critical test. Another problem with the wing design. Another delay. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the company on her shoulders. Failure wasn't an option. Not for Charles Morgan's daughter. Jason tucked Emma into bed later that night, their nightly ritual unchanged despite his exhaustion. Her room was small but filled with dreams, posters of aircraft on the walls, model planes hanging from the ceiling, on fishing line books about aviation stacked on the bedside table. "Tell me again about flying through the clouds, Daddy." Emma snuggled deeper into her blankets, eyes already heavy with sleep. Jason settled into the chair beside her bed, ignoring the protest from his back. The clouds looked like mountains from above, great ranges of white that stretched to the horizon. When the sun sets, they turn pink and orange like someone spilled paint across the sky. His voice grew softer, edged with the ache of remembering. And the stars, they're so bright up there, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. They guide pilots home when everything else fails. Did they guide you home? The question caught him off guard. Yes, Firefly, they always did. Then why did you stop flying? Jason's throat tightened. He'd never told her the full story about the mission in Nevada, about his wingman's failing engine at 20,000 feet, about breaking formation to stay with him, guiding him down through a sandstorm that turned the sky into a wall of rage, about the shrapnel from ground fire that tore through his aircraft on the way out, about ejecting over the desert and spending 2 days in the sand before rescue came, about the injury to his spine that ended his flying career. "Sometimes life has other plans for us," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean we stop looking up." Emma's eyes were already closing. "Maybe someday you'll fly again." Maybe. He kissed her forehead, knowing it was a lie. The doctors had been clear the damage was permanent. Sweet dreams, Firefly. After Emma fell asleep, Jason sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills. Medical expenses from his last spinal treatment. School supplies for Emma. The rent increase notification. Numbers that never added up, no matter how he arranged them. The veteran benefits covered some, but not enough. He'd taken the only job he could find that didn't require standing for 12 hours janitorial work at Skyward Aerospace. It was humiliating at first, working in a place where people like him had once walked as legends. But then he realized something: Emma could come with him after school sometimes. She could sit in the corner and draw. She could breathe the same air as the machines that touched the sky. And that was enough. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at Skyward before sunrise, her Tesla pulling into the reserved parking space as the security guard waved her through. The board meeting was scheduled for 9, and she needed time to prepare. The prototype's wing design issue threatened the entire military contract. Heads would roll. She strode through the executive wing, the building still quiet in the pre-dawn hours. In the conference room, she spread out the technical reports, scanning the data with a practiced eye. Her engineering degree from MIT wasn't just for show. She understood the physics of flight, the mathematics of thrust and lift. But understanding the theory wasn't the same as having intuition for it. Her father had that intuition. He could look at a design and see its soul know whether it would fly or fail before the first test. Rebecca had knowledge but lacked that instinctive connection. It was one more way she fell short of his legacy. The boardroom filled gradually with executives and the chief engineers. Coffee was poured, pleasantries exchanged with tight smiles. Everyone knew what was at stake. The military representatives will be here tomorrow for the demonstration. Rebecca began standing at the head of the table. Her voice was measured, controlled. But the simulation data shows the wing design is still experiencing stress fractures at high G maneuvers. What's your solution? The chief engineer cleared his throat. We've reinforced the structure, but it's compromising fuel efficiency. We're looking at a potential 10% reduction in range. Unacceptable. The contract specifications are clear. Rebecca's fingers tapped against the polished table. The Air Force won't accept a fighter with reduced range. We need more time. We don't have more time. The Pentagon has made it clear if we delay again, they'll reconsider Boeing's proposal. The unspoken threat hung in the air. Losing this contract wouldn't just hurt their bottom line, it could begin the company's slow death spiral. Find a solution by tomorrow or I'll find a team that can. The meeting ended with a tension that followed Rebecca back to her office. Through the glass wall, she watched as the engineering team dispersed, faces grim. She was pushing them hard, perhaps too hard. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. Pressure makes diamonds or dust. Let's see what they're made of. Later that afternoon, Jason pushed his cleaning cart through the engineering wing, keeping his head down as technicians hurried past. Emma sat cross-legged in a corner of the break room, her notebook open, sketching with intense concentration. He'd had to bring her with him today. Mrs. Kaplan had a doctor's appointment, and he couldn't afford to miss a shift. "Excuse me." A young engineer paused beside Emma, crouching to her level. "That's a pretty good drawing." Emma looked up, surprised but not shy. "Thank you. It's an F-35, but I added different vertical stabilizers." The engineer, Marcus, according to his ID badge, raised his eyebrows. "You know about vertical stabilizers?" "My dad taught me. They help with yaw control." Marcus glanced over at Jason, making the connection. "Your dad knows planes, huh?" "He used to fly them," Emma said proudly. "In the Air Force." Jason continued mopping, keeping Emma in his peripheral vision. Marcus seemed genuinely interested, not condescending, as he explained thrust-to-weight ratios to Emma in terms she could understand. She nodded, absorbing every word, asking questions that made the young engineer smile with surprise. Jason watched from a distance, mop in hand, and felt that familiar crack in his chest widen. This was why he stayed at Skyward, enduring the sidelong glances and occasional jabs. Not for himself, but for her. For the spark in her eyes when she was near aircraft, for the possibility that she might someday reach the sky he had lost. The afternoon wore on. Jason finished cleaning the engineering wing and moved to the restricted testing zone. Emma usually stayed in the break room, but when he turned around, she was gone. Panic flashed through him. The testing zone was off limits, without proper clearance, filled with prototype equipment and hazardous materials. He searched frantically, moving from room to room, ignoring the curious glances from technicians. Finally, a security guard pointed him toward the main hangar. "Your kid saw her heading that way about 10 minutes ago." Jason rushed through the corridors, his heart pounding. The main hangar housed the prototype fighter jet, the one Rebecca and her team were betting the company's future on. If Emma was caught there, he pushed through the hangar doors and froze. In the cavernous space, Rebecca Morgan stood over Emma, who sat cross-legged on the floor holding a faded blueprint she'd found in a recycling bin. The CEO's heels announced her displeasure like a judge's gavel, the sound echoing off the steel wall, sharp and final. "Who let this child in here?" Rebecca's voice cut through the hum of machinery. Emma looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide, innocent. I was just looking." "This is a restricted area." Rebecca gestured to the prototype fighter behind the glass partition. "Do you know how much that costs? More than your house, more than your school, more than anything you'll ever touch in your life." Emma's face flushed deep red. She stood clutching the blueprint to her chest. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Where's your parent?" Rebecca's gaze swept the hangar, landing on Jason as he rushed forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Jason said quickly, placing himself between Rebecca and his daughter. "She won't. She knows better than to wander off." "What, wander into a $1 million facility again?" Rebecca's gaze swept over him, cold and dismissive. She took in his uniform, the mop and bucket he'd left by the door, the calluses on his hands. "You think mopping floors in a hangar will get you back into the sky?" The words hung in the air like a blade. The room fell silent. Other workers nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Someone chuckled. Another coughed to hide a laugh. Jason's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then slowly relaxed. He'd learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Not here, not in front of Emma. He took his daughter's hand, gently pulling the blueprint from her fingers and setting it on a nearby table. "Come on, Firefly. Let's go." As they walked toward the exit, Emma whispered, "Dad, you used to fly, didn't you?" He looked down at her, his throat tight. "Yeah, Firefly. But now I just need you to live in a world that still has skies." She didn't understand, but she squeezed his hand anyway. That night, Jason sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the shadow of his right arm in the dim light. The tattoo was still there, hidden beneath his long sleeves, a pair of iron wings with the words Glory Squadron inscribed below. He hadn't looked at it in months. It reminded him of everything he'd lost. The Sky Amanda, the version of himself that believed he mattered. Jason Reed had fallen a long time ago. The scars on his back made him feel older than his 35 years. He'd been a fighter pilot in the Air Force flying F-16s with the Glory Squadron, a unit so elite that their missions were still classified. He'd flown over deserts and mountains, pulled maneuvers that defied physics, saved lives that would never know his name. Then came that mission in Nevada. His wingman's engine failed at 20,000 feet. Jason broke formation, stayed with him, guided him down through a sandstorm that turned the sky into a wall of rage. They both survived, but Jason's jet took shrapnel from ground fire on the way out. He ejected over the desert, spent 2 days in the sand before rescue came. The injury to his spine was severe enough to end his flying career. He was honorably discharged, given a medal he never wore, and sent back to a life that no longer fit. Amanda had been his whole world. She died of cancer during his physical therapy, and he couldn't even hold her hand without shaking from the pain in his back. Now he lived in this small apartment with Emma. She had her mother's smile and his love for the sky. Every night he told her stories about flying, but he never told her why he stopped. The medical bills had emptied his savings, so he took the only job he could find that didn't require standing for 12 hours. Janitorial work at Skyward Aerospace, the company that built the next generation of fighters, the place where people like him had once been revered. Across the city, Rebecca Morgan stood at the window of her penthouse, a glass of bourbon in her hand, watching the lights of Reagan National Airport in the distance. Planes took off and landed in a carefully orchestrated ballet, their navigation lights blinking red and green against the night sky. The board meeting had been brutal. The engineering team still hadn't solved the wing design problem. The military representatives would arrive tomorrow, expecting a flawless demonstration. Her father would have found a solution by now. He would have known exactly which engineer to push, which supplier to threaten, which test to prioritize. Rebecca took another sip of bourbon, feeling it burn down her throat. She'd fired 2 engineers today, hoping it would motivate the others. Her father's strategy cut off a finger to save the hand. But the fear in their eyes as security escorted them out, had that really been necessary? Would it actually solve the problem? She pushed the doubt away. Weakness had no place in the sky. That's what her father always said. The strong survived, the weak were left on the ground. Rebecca moved to her bedroom, stopping before the full-length mirror. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, arranged her features into her father's expression, confidence bordering on arrogance, strength without compromise. Weakness has no place in the sky, she whispered to her reflection. But the woman in the mirror looked suddenly young and uncertain, a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jason dropped Emma off at school, watching her run inside with her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders. After the incident yesterday, he'd had a long talk with her about boundaries and safety. She'd listened solemn and apologetic, but he saw the same longing in her eyes that he felt every day, the pull of the sky, the need to be closer to it. At Skyward, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Military officials in dress uniforms strode through the corridors flanked by executives in suits. The prototype demonstration was scheduled for noon, and everyone moved with the nervous energy of a crew preparing for takeoff. Jason kept his head down, methodically cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, mopping floors. But his ears caught fragments of conversations, engineers speaking in hurried whispers about stress tests and simulations. The wing design problem hadn't been solved. The demonstration was in jeopardy. In the engineering wing, Marcus and his team huddled around computer screens, faces drawn with exhaustion. They'd been working through the night, running simulation after simulation. Jason lingered nearby, ostensibly cleaning the water fountain, listening. "The reinforcement adds too much weight," one engineer muttered. "We're losing maneuverability." "What if we change the angle of the trailing edge?" Marcus suggested, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Just a 2-degree adjustment." "We've tried that. The wind tunnel tests show turbulence at supersonic speeds." "Then what about—" The door swung open and Rebecca Morgan entered, her expression thunderous. "The Pentagon representatives are in the conference room." Tell me you have a solution. Marcus stood shoulder sagging. We've tried everything, Ms. Morgan. The design is fundamentally sound, but the stress points at the wing joint. I don't want excuses. I want results. Rebecca's voice was glacial. If we lose this contract, I'll have to explain to the board why our engineering team couldn't solve a basic structural issue. I'm not sure I can justify keeping any of you after that. The threat hung in the air as she left. The engineers looked at each other, defeat written on their faces. Jason finished cleaning and pushed his cart toward the door, but not before glancing at the computer screen. The 3D model of the wing joint rotated slowly, the stress points highlighted in angry red. He recognized the problem immediately. It was a classic flutter issue, the kind that had plagued early jet designs. The solution wasn't reinforcement, but redistribution. Change the geometry, not the materials. It was something any experienced test pilot would spot. Jason continued his rounds, the solution burning in his mind like a fever. It wasn't his problem. It wasn't his responsibility. These were the same people who looked through him, who laughed when Rebecca Morgan belittled him in front of his daughter. But if Skyward lost the contract, how many jobs would disappear? How many families would suffer? His job might be at the bottom of the hierarchy, but it was still a job. And Emma's future medical insurance depended on it. During his lunch break, Jason found himself outside the now empty engineering lab. The computer was still on the 3D model, still rotating on the screen. He hesitated only a moment before slipping inside. His fingers moved over the keyboard with the memory of countless flight simulators and design reviews. He adjusted parameters, changed angles, redistributed stress points. The simulation ran the red warning indicators fading to yellow, then green. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, a minor adjustment to the geometry that redirected the forces like a pilot using the air itself to assist a maneuver. He saved the file and left as quietly as he'd entered. That afternoon, as military officials toured the facility, Jason cleaned the observation room overlooking the test chamber. Through the glass, he could see the prototype fighter, its sleek lines promising speed and lethality. Engineers swarmed around it, making last-minute adjustments. Rebecca Morgan stood to the side, her posture rigid, watching with laser focus. Marcus suddenly burst into the engineering room, waving a printout. I've got it! The wing design, someone solved it! The head engineer grabbed the paper, studying it with narrowed eyes. Where did this come from? It was on the main simulation computer. Someone ran it early this morning. The log shows 5:43 a.m. Look at these stress distributions. It's brilliant. The engineers gathered around, murmuring in approval. Rebecca stepped forward. Will it work? It already does in simulation. We've run it 5 times the wing holds under every scenario. It's like someone thought like a pilot, not an engineer. They understood how the forces work in actual flight. Rebecca's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. Implement it. Now, the demonstration starts in 30 minutes. Jason continued cleaning, keeping his face carefully neutral. Through the window, he watched as the engineers made rapid adjustments to the prototype. No one looked up. No one noticed the janitor with calloused hands in a secret tattoo. The demonstration proceeded without incident. The prototype performed flawlessly in the chamber, withstanding forces that would have torn the previous design apart. The military representatives left with handshakes and promises of contract finalization. Skyward Aerospace had secured its future. In the aftermath, champagne flowed in the executive offices. Rebecca accepted congratulations with practiced grace, but her mind was elsewhere. Who had solved the wing problem? The timestamp on the file indicated it was done before any engineers had arrived that morning. Security logs showed only maintenance staff in the building that early. She cornered Marcus after the celebration. Find out who accessed that computer. I want to know who saved our contract. At the same time, Emma sat in the corner of the employee break room, drawing airplanes while she waited for Jason's shift to end. Marcus passed by, still riding the high of the successful demonstration, and paused to look over her shoulder. That's really good, he said, genuinely impressed. You've got the proportions exactly right. Emma beamed. I'm drawing the new prototype. It's beautiful, isn't it? It is now that the wings are fixed. Marcus crouched beside her, pointing to her drawing. See the way you've drawn the trailing edge. That's exactly the solution someone came up with this morning. Saved the whole project. Emma looked at him curiously. My dad says the air is alive. It wants to help you fly if you respect it. Marcus blinked, something clicking into place. Your dad was a pilot, right? Where is he now? Cleaning the labs upstairs. Emma pointed to the ceiling. He knows everything about planes. He flew F-16s in the Glory Squadron. Marcus's expression changed, a mixture of surprise and dawning realization. He looked at Emma's drawing again, at the precise rendering of the wing geometry that had saved their prototype. The Glory Squadron. Are you sure? Emma nodded solemnly. He has the wings tattooed on his arm, but he doesn't like to talk about it anymore. That evening, as Jason collected Emma and prepared to leave, Rebecca Morgan was reviewing security footage in her office. The camera covering the engineering lab had captured a janitor entering early that morning, a man who moved with purpose to the computer, his hands moving over the keyboard with the confidence of experience, not hesitation. She zoomed in on his face. Jason Reed, the man she'd humiliated in front of his daughter, the man who cleaned floors and emptied trash, the man who apparently had just saved her company's most important contract. Rebecca pulled up his personnel file. The employment application was sparse. Previous work history listed simply as United States Air Force 2005-2015. No details, no achievements, nothing to indicate he had been anything more than a basic airman, but something nagged at her memory. The Glory Squadron. Why did that sound familiar? Her father had mentioned them once, an elite unit of test pilots and combat veterans who flew the most dangerous missions. The kind of men Charles Morgan had respected, perhaps the only people he ever truly admired. She searched the company database for any mention of the Glory Squadron. A single file appeared: security clearance required. Her father's personal notes. She entered her override code, and the document opened. A mission report from 10 years ago. Operation Blue Shield. A classified test of Skyward's experimental stealth technology in hostile territory. Her father had been on board as an observer when the aircraft systems failed over the desert. 2 F-16s from the Glory Squadron had been dispatched for escort and emergency support. One pilot had stayed with the crippled aircraft through a sandstorm, guiding it to a safe landing against all odds, taking enemy fire in the process. Charles Morgan's notes were uncharacteristically emotional. Captain Reed's actions went beyond duty. Without his intervention, I would not have survived. Skyward owes him a debt that cannot be measured. Captain Reed, Jason Reed, the janitor who mopped her floors, had once saved her father's life. Rebecca sat back, feeling as though the air had been sucked from the room. The man she had mocked, whose dignity she had tried to strip away, was a hero her father had admired. And today, he had saved her company without seeking recognition or reward. The next day, Jason arrived at work to find his supervisor waiting with an unusual request. Miss, Morgan wants to see the wing designs from yesterday's successful demonstration applied to the actual prototype. She's asked for you specifically to clean the observation room during the implementation. The supervisor shrugged, clearly confused by the specific request. Must have liked your work yesterday. Jason nodded, equally confused but unwilling to show it. The observation room overlooked the main testing chamber, where the prototype fighter was now being prepared for its first actual flight tests. Engineers swarmed around it, implementing the design changes that had saved the military contract. As he cleaned the windows of the observation room, he could see Rebecca Morgan on the floor below, moving among the engineers checking progress. There was something different about her today, less brittle, more focused. Several times she glanced up toward the observation room, her expression unreadable. Jason continued working, methodical and thorough, trying to ignore the ache in his chest as he watched them prepare the fighter for flight. His hands remembered the feel of controls, the vibration of afterburners, the weight of G-forces pressing him into his seat. Flying wasn't just what he did, it was who he was, until it wasn't anymore. The afternoon wore on. Jason was just finishing when the door to the observation room opened. Rebecca Morgan entered alone, closing the door behind her. They stood in silence for a long moment, the prototype fighter gleaming below them like a silver promise. The wing design, she said finally. It was you. It wasn't a question. Jason considered denial, then decided against it. The solution was straightforward. Any experienced pilot would have seen it. But you're not a pilot anymore, you're a janitor. The words held none of yesterday's contempt, only confusion. I clean floors now. That doesn't erase what I know. Rebecca's gaze was penetrating. Why help us? After how you've been treated here, after what I said to you and your daughter, why would you save our contract? Jason looked through the window at the fighter jet. Because that plane deserves to fly down. And because there are good people who work here. People with families who depend on their jobs. He paused. I don't have to like you to do the right thing. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, respect perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. My father wrote about you. Operation Blue Shield. You saved his life. Jason's face revealed nothing but his shoulders tensed. I was just doing my job. He didn't think so. He called you a hero. There are no heroes in war, Ms. Morgan. Just people trying to get home. Before Rebecca could respond, a commotion erupted below. People shouting, running toward the far end of the hangar. Through the window, Jason could see a small figure climbing one of the metal observation ladders, a child with pigtails and a pink backpack. Emma, his heart stopped. She must have come looking for him after school instead of going to Mrs. Kaplan's. Now she was 50 feet up on a maintenance ladder that wasn't meant for children or anyone without safety equipment. Emma, the name tore from his throat as he bolted for the door. Rebecca was right behind him as they raced down the stairs and across the hangar floor. Engineers and technicians had gathered at the base of the ladder, calling up to Emma to stay still, not to move. Emma looked down, her face pale with fear, as she realized how high she had climbed. Daddy, I wanted to see the plane better. Her small hands slipped on the metal rung. Jason reached the ladder just as a section gave way beneath Emma's feet. The rusted bolts not maintained for years tore free from the wall. Emma screamed as she began to fall. Jason lunged forward, positioning himself beneath her. But Rebecca was faster, closer, her hands reaching up to catch the falling child. They both went down hard on the concrete floor, Rebecca taking the brunt of the impact, cradling Emma against her chest. Emma, Jason dropped to his knees beside them, heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Emma looked up, tears streaming down her face but otherwise unharmed. I'm sorry, Daddy. I just wanted to see. Rebecca sat up slowly, wincing. Her suit was torn, her arms scraped and beginning to bleed. She's okay, just scared. Her voice was gentle, so unlike her usual clipped tones. Jason helped them both to their feet, gratitude and relief washing over him in equal measure. Thank you. I don't know how to... Emma suddenly doubled over, clutching her wrist. It hurts. Jason carefully examined her arm. The wrist was already swelling, possibly broken. He tore off his wash shirt, using it as a makeshift sling. In the process, his tattoo was fully exposed, the iron wings of the Glory Squadron stark against his skin. Rebecca's eyes widened as she recognized the emblem, the same one from her father's files. Proof positive of Jason's identity, of his past as a decorated pilot, of the man he had once been. Medical personnel rushed forward, taking over Emma's care. As they led her toward the first aid station, Jason started to follow, but Rebecca caught his arm. Wait, her voice was low, urgent. I need to know, the wing design, how did you see what an entire team of engineers missed? Jason hesitated, torn between following his daughter and answering the question. Because they were looking at it as a structure. I looked at it as something alive. He pulled away gently. I need to be with my daughter now. Rebecca watched him go, standing alone amid the chaos of the hangar, the gleaming prototype fighter forgotten behind her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something crack in the careful armor she had built around herself. The man who mopped her floors had once saved her father's life, and today he had saved her company while she had caught his falling daughter. The world suddenly seemed less divided than it had yesterday, less about those who flew and those who fell. Perhaps Rebecca thought they were all just trying to find their way home. The fluorescent lights of Virginia General Hospital buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the emergency room waiting area. Jason sat with his elbows on his knees, watching the second hand of the wall clock tick through another revolution. 2 hours since they had arrived. 2 hours since a doctor had taken Emma back for x-rays, leaving him with clipboard forms in mounting anxiety. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Reed, your insurance information seems to be incomplete. Jason straightened, the familiar knot of financial dread tightening in his stomach. I provided my employee coverage from Skyward. Yes, but there's a substantial deductible for emergency services. Do you have secondary coverage? Jason shook his head. Mental calculations already running. The rent was due next week. Emma needed new school shoes. The car payment was already 2 weeks late. I'll figure something out. How's my daughter? Before the nurse could answer, Rebecca Morgan strode through the automatic doors, still in her torn suit, dried blood on her sleeve. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around her presence. The nurse instinctively stepped back. Emma Reed's medical expenses will be covered by Skyward Aerospace. Rebecca handed a business card to the nurse. The accident occurred on company property. Send all bills to this address, attention of my office. The nurse glanced between them, nodded once, and retreated to the desk. Jason stared at Rebecca, searching her face for the motivation behind this unexpected intervention. You don't have to do that. Actually, I do. Company liability. Rebecca took a seat beside him, maintaining a professional distance. How is she? Still waiting to hear. Probably a fractured wrist. His voice caught parental guilt washing over him. I should have been watching her more closely. Children have a talent for finding trouble in supposedly secure areas. That latter should have been better maintained. I'll have a safety team inspect the entire facility tomorrow. The clinical efficiency in her voice was at odds with the way she'd cradled Emma against her chest, taking the impact of the fall without hesitation. Jason studied her profile, seeing for the first time the shadow of exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. Thank you, he said finally, for catching her, for being there. Rebecca's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing something vulnerable underneath. I saw her falling and just reacted. She looked down at her scraped arm. Instinct, not heroism. A doctor emerged from the double doors, clipboard in hand. Mr. Reed, Emma's wrist is fractured, but it's a clean break. We're putting on a cast now. She'll be good as new in about 6 weeks. Relief flooded through Jason. 6 weeks. Manageable. Not a complicated break requiring surgery or extensive rehabilitation. Can I see her? In a few minutes, the nurse will come get you. As the doctor left, an awkward silence settled between Jason and Rebecca. They were strangers inhabiting different worlds that had collided in the space of 24 hours, first through a wing design, now through a child's accident. I should get back to Skyward. Rebecca stood abruptly. The military representatives are still on site. Of course, Jason nodded, understanding the demands of her position. And thank you again for everything. Rebecca hesitated, then reached into her pocket and placed a business card on the seat next to him. Call my office when Emma is released. We'll arrange transportation. She turned to leave, then paused. And Mr. Reed, that wing design saved a $2 billion contract. We should discuss your future role at Skyward. Before Jason could respond, Rebecca was gone, the automatic doors whispering closed behind her. He picked up her card, running his thumb over the embossed lettering. Rebecca Morgan, Chief Executive Officer. A world away from Jason Reed maintenance staff. Security camera footage played on the monitor in Rebecca's office. The grainy black and white images showing Jason Reed entering the engineering lab at 5:43 a.m. His movements were purposeful. No hesitation, no confusion, no signs of someone out of their element. He navigated the advanced modeling software with the fluency of long practice, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Marcus leaned forward, studying the footage. He knew exactly what he was doing. Those aren't the actions of someone with basic knowledge. No, Rebecca agreed, they're not. She tapped her pen against the desk, mind racing. Run a deeper background check. Military records, education history, everything. Most of it will be classified if he was really with the Glory Squadron. Then get what you can. Rebecca turned to the window, gazing out at the Skyward testing grounds. And find out what happened to him. Why a decorated fighter pilot ended up mopping our floors. After Marcus left, Rebecca unlocked her bottom desk drawer and removed a leather-bound journal, her father's private notes separate from the official company records. Charles Morgan had been meticulous about documenting his thoughts, particularly regarding people he considered important. She flipped through the pages until she found the entry from Operation Blue Shield. The handwriting was strong, decisive, just like her father. Captain Reed demonstrated exceptional airmanship under extreme conditions. When our aircraft lost navigation and communication systems over hostile territory, he positioned his F-16 so close I could see his face through the canopy, hand signals only in zero visibility, guided us through a sandstorm that would have killed lesser pilots, took enemy fire rather than break formation. Most striking was his calm. No heroics, no theatrics, just quiet competence in the face of certain death. When I asked afterward why he risked himself, he said simply, "Because you were up there," as if that explained everything. Men like Reed aren't made, they're born. Natural pilots who understand intuitively what the rest of us spend lifetimes trying to learn. Skyward would benefit from his expertise if the military ever lets him go. Rebecca closed the journal, her father's admiration for Jason Reed a stark contrast to her own treatment of the man. She had mocked him in front of his daughter, dismissed him as nothing more than a janitor, when all along he had been the kind of person Charles Morgan had respected most. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire career trying to earn her father's approval, and here was a man who had gained it in a single afternoon of courage. Emma sat on the edge of the hospital bed, legs swinging the new pink cast on her left wrist, a bright counterpoint to the institutional beige of the room. Jason helped her put on her jacket, careful not to jostle the injured arm. "Does it hurt, Firefly?" He gently zipped the jacket, his heart aching at the sight of the cast. "Not much anymore." Emma examined her cast with the fascination only an 8-year-old could muster. "Can my friends sign it?" "Of course they can." Jason gathered her backpack, mentally calculating the cost of the pain medication prescription waiting at the pharmacy. Even with the hospital bill covered by Skyward, the additional expenses would strain his already precarious finances. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Reed, there's a car waiting for you downstairs." Outside the hospital entrance, a black Suburban idled at the curb, a driver in a suit standing beside the open rear door. "Mr. Reed, Miss Morgan sent me to take you and your daughter home." Jason hesitated and uncomfortable with accepting charity, but aware of the long bus ride that would otherwise await Emma. He helped her into the back seat where a booster cushion had already been installed. The thoughtfulness of this detail wasn't lost on him. Someone had considered Emma's comfort and safety. The drive to their apartment complex was quiet, Emma drowsy from pain medication, Jason lost in thoughts of what Rebecca had meant by discussing his future role at Skyward. Was it a genuine offer of advancement, or just a way to manage a potential liability? The man who had solved their engineering crisis was also the man who had saved the founder's life, a complicated PR situation if it ever became public. When they arrived at the apartment complex, Jason helped Emma out of the car. The driver handed him an envelope. "Ms. Morgan asked me to give you this." Inside the envelope was a note on Skyward letterhead. "Take tomorrow off with pay to care for your daughter. Call my office to discuss your return." Below was Rebecca's signature, the loops and angles as precise and controlled as everything else about her. Jason pocketed the note and thanked the driver, guiding a sleepy Emma toward their building. As they climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment, each step felt heavier than the last, the day's events catching up with him in a wave of exhaustion. Mrs. Kaplan was waiting at their door, her face lined with concern. "I came as soon as I got your message." "How is our girl?" Emma held up her cast proudly. "I broke my wrist, but I was really brave. The doctor said so." Jason unlocked the door, the familiar sight of their modest apartment, both comforting and somehow diminished after the gleaming expanses of Skyward and the sterile efficiency of the hospital. "Thank you for checking in, Mrs. K. We're okay for tonight." After Mrs. Kaplan left, Jason heated soup for dinner, helped Emma change into pajamas, and administered her pain medication. The routine was familiar. He had cared for Amanda through months of cancer treatments, learning the rhythm of medication schedules and comfort measures. But watching Emma struggle with the simple task of eating soup one-handed brought a different kind of ache. "Daddy," Emma looked up from her bowl, suddenly serious. "Are you in trouble because of me, because I went up the ladder?" Jason set his spoon down. "No, Firefly, you made a mistake, but we all do. I'm just grateful you're okay. That lady caught me, the one who was mean to you before." Emma tilted her head, processing this contradiction. "She seems different now." "People are complicated, Emma. Sometimes they surprise you." Jason thought of Rebecca's face when she'd recognized his tattoo, the shock giving way to understanding. Maybe Ms. Morgan just needed to see us differently, too. After Emma was asleep, Jason sat at the kitchen table with bills spread before him. The hospital expenses would be covered, but the new prescription was expensive, and Emma would need help with daily activities for at least a few weeks. He might have to take additional time off work, further straining their finances. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Reed, this is Rebecca Morgan. Please come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss the engineering solution you provided. A car will pick you up at 9:30. Jason stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. He had no illusions about his position at Skyward. He was a janitor with a past, not an engineer with a future. Whatever Rebecca wanted to discuss, it wouldn't change the fundamental reality of his situation. But the wing design had worked. The military contract was secured. Perhaps there was room for negotiation, better pay, better hours, maybe even a position that made use of his expertise without requiring the physical demands his back could no longer handle. He texted back a simple, "I'll be there." Then he reached for the prescription bottle beside Emma's school portrait, swallowing 2 pain pills dry. His back was on fire tonight, the strain of the day's events aggravating the old injury. As the medication slowly dulled the pain, Jason closed his eyes, remembering the feeling of banking through clouds, the world falling away beneath him, nothing but blue sky ahead. The memory was so vivid he could almost feel the G-forces pressing him into his seat, the stick responsive under his hand, the engine's roar vibrating through his body. In those moments he had been fully alive, fully himself. Before the sandstorm, before the ejection that shattered his spine, before Amanda's diagnosis and the slow, helpless months that followed, before he became a man who mopped floors and counted pennies and told his daughter bedtime stories about a sky he would never touch again. The security guard waved the black Suburban through the Skyward Aerospace gates at precisely 9:45 a.m. Jason sat in the back seat dressed in the best clothes he owned, khaki pants and a button-down shirt that had once fit him better before stress and grief had stripped 20 pounds from his frame. Mrs. Kaplan had agreed to watch Emma, who was still drowsy from pain medication. The driver escorted Jason through the executive entrance, a part of the facility he had only cleaned, never entered as a visitor. The lobby was all glass and steel, with a massive sculpture of the Skyward logo suspended from the ceiling, a stylized wing catching an updraft. The elevator ride to the top floor was swift and silent. When the doors opened, Jason found himself in a reception area where a sleek desk separated visitors from the executive offices beyond. The receptionist looked up, recognition flickering across her face, not of Jason Reed, the person, but of Jason Reed, the janitor, now strangely displaced from his usual environment. "Mr. Reed," for Ms. Morgan. His voice sounded foreign in these surroundings, too rough against the polished surfaces. "Of course. She's expecting you." The receptionist pressed a button, and the frosted glass doors swung open. Straight through to the end of the hall, Jason walked past a series of offices, aware of curious glances from executives and assistants. At the end of the hall stood double doors of dark wood, the CEO's office. He knocked once, heard a voice call, "Enter," and pushed the door open. Rebecca's office was larger than Jason's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Skyward campus and testing grounds. One wall was lined with models of aircraft Skyward had developed over the decades. Another displayed photographs of Rebecca's father with presidents, generals, and aerospace pioneers. Rebecca sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a conference table, reviewing documents on a slim laptop. She looked up as Jason entered, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "How is Emma this morning?" "Sore, but in good spirits. Thank you for asking." Jason took the offered seat back straight, despite the protest of old injuries. "And thank you for covering the hospital expenses. It's appreciated." Rebecca closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "As I said, it happened on company property. We take responsibility for that." She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "But that's not why I asked you here today." "The wing design." Jason had nodded. "I shouldn't have accessed the computer without authorization. I understand if there are consequences." "Consequences?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Reed, you saved a $2 billion contract and potentially hundreds of jobs. The Pentagon representatives were impressed enough to fast-track the approval process. If anything, Skyward owes you a debt of gratitude." Jason shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with praise after so long without it. "I just saw a problem I could fix." "That's precisely why I called you here." Rebecca stood, moving to the window. "The problem you fixed had stumped our best engineers for weeks. Your solution was elegant, intuitive, the kind of thinking we need more of at Skyward." She turned to face him. "I want to offer you a position as a safety consultant for the prototype program." Jason blinked, certain he had misheard. "A consultant?" Your experience as a test pilot gives you insights our engineers lack. You understand how these aircraft behave in real-world conditions, not just simulations. Rebecca returned to her desk, sliding a folder toward him. The position comes with a significant salary increase, health benefits, and a flexible schedule that would accommodate your daughter's needs. Jason opened the folder, scanning the offer letter inside. The salary was more than 5 times what he currently earned. The benefits package included comprehensive health coverage with minimal deductibles. It was more than generous, it was life-changing. Why? The question escaped before he could consider it. Rebecca's expression shifted, something vulnerable briefly visible beneath her professional exterior. Multiple reasons. First, it makes business no sense. Your expertise is valuable and we're wasting it having you clean floors. She paused. Second, I've been reading my father's notes about Operation Blue Shield. He credited you with saving his life. Jason looked away, uncomfortable with the reminder. That was a long time ago. 10 years, and yet he wrote about it until his death last year. Rebecca's voice softened. He admired you, Mr. Reed. He thought you embodied the qualities that make a truly exceptional pilot: instinct, courage, calm under pressure. The same qualities that led you to solve our wing design problem. The praise felt like sandpaper against Jason's skin, abrasive, painful. He had spent years burying the pilot he used to be, accepting his diminished life one day at a time. This sudden resurrection of his past self threatened the careful balance he had constructed. I appreciate the offer, Jason said finally, but I'm not that person anymore. My injury doesn't prevent you from thinking like a pilot. Rebecca leaned forward. We're not asking you to fly, Mr. Reed. We're asking you to help us build aircraft that others will fly safely, effectively, with the benefit of your experience. Jason looked down at the offer letter, again the numbers swimming before his eyes. The money would solve their immediate financial problems. Emma could have new clothes, better food, maybe even piano lessons, like she'd been asking for. He could start a college fund for her, move them to an apartment with an elevator, instead of 3 flights of stairs that tortured his back. But accepting meant stepping back into a world he had forced himself to leave behind. It meant acknowledging the ghost of the pilot he had been and the impossible distance between that man and the one he had become. I need time to think about it, he said finally. Rebecca nodded. Of course. Take the weekend to consider. The position is yours if you want it. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. The car will take you home, and we can arrange transportation for your shifts next week, regardless of your decision about the consultant role. As Jason rose to leave, Rebecca stopped him with one final question. Mr. Reed, why did you really help us with the wing design? You could have let us fail. After how you were treated, how I treated you, no one would have blamed you. Jason paused at the door, considering the question. When you're up there, he said finally, thousands of feet above the ground, politics and pride don't matter. The only thing that matters is bringing everyone home safely. He met her gaze directly. I may not fly anymore, Ms. Morgan, but some instincts don't change. I saw a problem. I fixed it. That's all. The simplicity of his answer seemed to affect her more than any elaborate explanation could have. Rebecca nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals, not supervisor and employee. The world needs more of that kind of thinking, Mr. Reed. Skyward needs it. I hope you'll consider joining us in a capacity worthy of your abilities. As the elevator descended to the ground floor, Jason leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The offer letter seemed to burn in his pocket, its promise both tempting and terrifying. A chance to reclaim part of his old identity. A chance to provide better for Emma. A chance to be something more than the man who cleaned up after others. But accepting meant facing the pain of what he had lost, not just physically, but the brotherhood of pilots, the purpose of serving the identity that had defined him for so long. It meant admitting that this diminished version of himself might still have value. The Suburban returned him to his apartment, where Mrs. Kaplan was helping Emma decorate her cast with markers. The contrast between Skyward's gleaming corporate headquarters and his modest living room with its secondhand furniture and water stain on the ceiling was jarring. Daddy, look, Mrs. K helped me draw wings on my cast. Emma held up her arm, displaying a pair of stylized wings surprisingly similar to his Glory Squadron tattoo. That's beautiful, Firefly. Jason set his keys on the counter, forcing a smile despite the turmoil inside. How's the pain today? Better. Can I go back to school on Monday? Chelsea's birthday is Tuesday and she's bringing cupcakes. We'll see what the doctor says. Jason thanked Mrs. Kaplan for watching Emma waiting until she left before sitting beside his daughter on the couch. Emma, I need to talk to you about something important. Emma's expression grew serious. Are we in trouble? No, nothing like that. I've been offered a different job at Skyward. Not cleaning anymore, but helping design planes. It would mean more money, better insurance for when you need doctors. Emma's eyes widened. Like being a pilot again? Not flying, Jason corrected gently, but using what I know about flying to help make planes safer. That sounds perfect. Emma threw her good arm around his neck. You always say the sky misses you. Now you can be closer to it again. Her simple enthusiasm cut through his doubts like sunlight through clouds. Perhaps it was time to stop defining himself by what he had lost and start recognizing what remained to his knowledge, his instincts, his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. It's not that simple, Firefly, Jason said, though his resolve was already weakening. But I'm thinking about it. That evening after Emma was asleep, Jason sat on the fire escape outside their apartment window, looking up at the night sky. Air traffic from Reagan National created slow-moving constellations against the darkness, navigation lights blinking red and green. He used to be up there, part of that celestial choreography. Now he watched from below, earthbound and aching. The offer letter lay on his lap, the opportunity it represented both gift and challenge. Taking the job meant accepting that he would never fly again, that consulting on aircraft design was the closest he would ever come to the sky he loved. It meant embracing this new identity instead of clinging to the ghost of his former self. But it also meant giving Emma a better life. It meant using his hard-won knowledge to make aircraft safer for the next generation of pilots. It meant perhaps finding purpose again in the wake of so much loss. His phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus, the young engineer who had befriended Emma, heard about the consultant offer. Team would be lucky to have your expertise. No pressure, but there's a test flight Tuesday if you're interested in observing. Your call. Jason stared at the message, feeling a pull he hadn't experienced in years. Not the pull of the sky itself, which remained forever out of reach, but the pull of purpose, of having something valuable to contribute again. He texted back, I'll think about it. Across the city, Rebecca Morgan stood at the window of her penthouse, bourbon in hand, watching the same air traffic Jason observed from his fire escape. The day had been a series of victories. The military contract secured, the board appeased, a solution to the engineering problem implemented. By any objective measure, she should feel satisfied. Instead, she felt unsettled. Jason Reed had disrupted her carefully constructed worldview. He didn't fit into either category. Her father had taught her to recognize those who flew and those who fell. He had flown and fallen, yet retained the essence of what had made him exceptional in the first place. The security team had delivered the background report on Jason earlier that day. United States Air Force Academy, graduated with honors. Test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base, top of his class. Selected for the Glory Squadron at 28, the youngest pilot ever admitted to the elite unit. Distinguished Flying Cross for actions during Operation Blue Shield. Medical discharge following spinal injuries sustained during a rescue mission. And then, nothing. A 2-year gap in his employment history, presumably during his recovery and his wife's illness, followed by a series of menial jobs, each paying less than the last, until he landed at Skyward Aerospace as a janitor. A trajectory of diminishment. A fall from grace so profound it seemed almost deliberate in its cruelty. Rebecca's phone rang, the board chairman, calling for an update on the military contract. She answered with practiced efficiency, her professional mask slipping back into place. Yes, the final tests are scheduled for Tuesday. The Pentagon representatives will be present. No, there's no cause for concern. The design issue has been resolved. She didn't mention Jason Reed or his contribution. That would require explaining why a janitor had access to their engineering systems, which would lead to questions about security protocols and hiring practices. Better to present the solution as a team effort, at least until she had determined Reed's role moving forward. After ending the call, Rebecca returned to the window, her mind still on Jason. His refusal to immediately accept her offer had surprised her. Most people in his position would have jumped at the opportunity. The salary increase alone was life-changing. But he had hesitated, almost as if the prospect of returning to the world of aerospace engineering was painful rather than appealing. She understood that kind of pain, the fear of not measuring up to your former self. Since her father's death, she had felt it every day, with every decision, wondering if Charles Morgan would have approved if she was honoring his legacy or diminishing it. Rebecca set her glass down a decision forming. Jason Reed might need more than just a job offer. He might need to see that his expertise was truly valued, that his contribution mattered. And she knew exactly how to show him. Monday morning found Jason back at Skyward Aerospace, mop in hand, cleaning the hallways of the engineering wing. He had decided to return to work despite Rebecca's offer of additional time off. Emma had insisted she was well enough to return to school with her cast as a badge of honor, and Mrs. Kaplan had agreed to watch her afterward. The consultant position remained an open question. Jason had spent the weekend weighing the pros and cons, discussing it with Emma, even calling his former wingman from the Glory Squadron for advice. The opportunity was too good to dismiss outright, but the emotional implications were complex. Returning to the world of aerospace design meant confronting daily reminders of what he had lost. As he worked, Jason noticed a difference in how people treated him. Word had apparently spread about his role in solving the wing design problem. Engineers nodded to him in the hallways. Technicians made eye contact instead of looking through him. It was a subtle shift, but noticeable after years of invisibility. Marcus stopped him outside the break room, coffee in hand. "Hey, Reed, thought about that test flight tomorrow. Several of us would appreciate your perspective." Jason wrung out his mop, buying time to consider. "I haven't decided about the consultant position yet." "No pressure. But if you're interested, there's a briefing at 0800, Observation Room B." Marcus offered a casual salute with his coffee cup. "Your call." The invitation lingered in Jason's mind as he continued his rounds. The test flight would be the first real-world evaluation of the modified wing design, his design. Part of him wanted to see it in action, to know if his solution performed as well in practice as it had in simulation. Another part feared the proximity to aircraft would only sharpen the ache of what he had lost. When his shift ended, Jason found Rebecca waiting by the employee exit, her presence so unexpected that he almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed more casually than he had ever seen her, slacks and a blazer instead of her usual power suit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Mr. Reed, do you have a moment?" She gestured to a nearby bench away from the flow of departing employees. Jason set down his backpack, curious about this unexpected encounter. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Have you had a chance to consider the consultant position?" "I have." Jason chose his words carefully. "It's a generous offer, but I'm concerned about my qualifications. I've been out of the industry for years. And yet you solved a problem our top engineers couldn't crack." Rebecca's gaze was direct, challenging. "Your instincts are intact, Mr. Reed. Your knowledge is still valuable." "Instincts aren't the same as current expertise." "Then we'll provide training to fill any gaps." Rebecca leaned forward, her posture shifting from corporate to personal. "Look, I'll be direct. I've read your service record, what isn't classified at least. You were exceptional, the kind of pilot others aspired to be. That doesn't just disappear because of an injury." Jason looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "With all due respect, Ms. Morgan, you don't know me." "No, but my father did." Rebecca's voice softened. "He wrote about you, about Operation Blue Shield. He said you were the calmest person he'd ever seen under pressure, that you made impossible decisions seem routine." She paused. Skyward needs that kind of thinking now more than ever. The mention of her father shifted something in Jason's perception. Charles Morgan had been a legend in aerospace, brilliant, demanding visionary. The idea that such a man had written about him, had valued his judgment, carried weight. "The test flight tomorrow," Jason said finally. "I'd like to observe. After that, I'll give you my decision about the consultant role." Relief flickered across Rebecca's face. "The briefing is at 800. I'll make sure you have clearance." She stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for considering it." Jason shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the direct eye contact, the respect implicit in both. "I haven't said yes yet." "No," Rebecca acknowledged with the hint of a smile. "But you're thinking about it. That's a start." As she walked away, Jason remained on the bench, considering the path before him. A year ago, even a week ago, the idea of returning to aerospace design would have seemed impossible, a cruel reminder of all he had lost. Now it felt like a door slowly opening, revealing a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to imagine, that there might still be a place for him in the sky, even if he never left the ground again. The observation room overlooking the Skyward test facility hummed with activity at 0750 the next morning. Engineers reviewed data on laptops, technicians monitored telemetry displays, and military representatives conversed in low tones. The prototype fighter sat on the tarmac below, sleek and predatory in the morning sun, its modified wings gleaming. Jason entered quietly, feeling out of place in the polo shirt and khakis Rebecca had sent to his apartment that morning, along with a temporary security badge that granted him access to the facility. He chose a seat in the back row, away from the clusters of technical staff wanting to observe without drawing attention. Marcus spotted him and came over, offering a cup of coffee. "Glad you made it. It's going to be an interesting test." "What's the flight profile?" Jason accepted the coffee, grateful for the normalcy of the interaction. "Standard evaluation sequence. Subsonic handling first, then transonic, finally supersonic to Mach 1.8. Your wing modifications will get a thorough workout." Marcus grinned. "The pilot's good, but he's no glory squadron." Jason sipped his coffee, hiding his discomfort at the reference. "Who's flying?" "Peterson, Air Force test pilot. Solid by the book guy." The door opened again and Rebecca entered with two Pentagon officials. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly when she spotted Jason in the back row. She gave a slight nod of acknowledgement before turning her attention to the briefing officer. The pre-flight briefing was detailed in technical fuel loads, test parameters, emergency procedures. Jason listened with half an ear, his attention focused on the aircraft below. His aircraft, in a sense. His design modifications would either prove themselves today or fail spectacularly, with careers and contracts hanging in the balance. As the briefing concluded, the test pilot entered the observation room for final instructions. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson was about Jason's age, with the confident bearing of a career military aviator. He scanned the assembly, his gaze landing on Jason with a flash of recognition. "Reed, Jason Reed." Peterson changed course, heading toward the back row. "Didn't expect to see you here. Glory Squadron, right?" Jason stood, accepting the offered handshake. "A lifetime ago." "Good to meet you, Colonel. I studied your Nevada mission at test pilot school. Textbook example of crisis management under extreme conditions." Peterson's respect was evident. "You're consulting on this project." Before Jason could answer, Rebecca appeared beside them. "Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, I see you've met Mr. Reed. He's providing valuable perspective on the wing modification you'll be testing today." The introduction was smooth, professional, acknowledging Jason's contribution without specifying his official role, which remained undetermined. Peterson nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "Well, I'm glad to have your eyes on this, Reed. Any insights before I take her up?" Jason hesitated, aware of the attention suddenly focused on him. It had been years since anyone had asked for his professional opinion about aircraft performance. Yet the knowledge was still there, dormant but accessible, like a language once fluently spoken. "The simulations show increased sensitivity in the roll axis at transonic speeds," he said finally. "Anticipate a lighter stick force when transitioning through Mach 0.9 to 1.1. Peterson nodded, processing the information with professional interest. "I'll keep that in mind. Anything else?" "Trust the design." Jason glanced at Rebecca, then back to the pilot. "It looks unorthodox on paper, but it flows with the air rather than fighting it. Let the aircraft tell you what it needs." "Roger that." Peterson offered a respectful nod before heading to the elevator that would take him to the tarmac. As the room reorganized for the test flight observation, Rebecca remained beside Jason. "That was good advice. Practical, experience-based." Jason shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just an observation. An observation that might make the difference between a successful test and a pilot wrestling with unexpected handling characteristics." Rebecca's voice was low, meant for him alone. "This is what I meant about your value to Skyward, Mr. Reed. You see things from the pilot's perspective, things our engineers can calculate but not truly understand." Before Jason could respond, the test director called the room to order. On the tarmac below, Peterson climbed into the prototype fighter. Canopy closed. Pre-flight checks completed. Engines started with a distant roar that vibrated through the observation room windows. Jason felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the mix of anticipation and longing that accompanied every aircraft departure he had witnessed since his medical discharge. His hands instinctively gripped the armrests of his chair, muscle memory from thousands of takeoffs responding to the visual cues. The fighter taxied to the runway threshold, paused for final clearance, then accelerated with shocking swiftness. Wheels up, gear retracted, a graceful climbing turn toward the test area. For the next hour, Jason watched with professional detachment as Peterson put the aircraft through its paces. Handling tests at various altitudes and speeds, G-loading trials to evaluate structural integrity. Each maneuver was precise, methodical, exactly what you wanted in a test pilot. The telemetry displays showed that the modified wing design was performing as predicted. Stress readings remained within parameters. Fuel efficiency was actually slightly better than projected. The engineers around Jason grew increasingly animated as the data confirmed their calculations and his intuitive solution. Then came the transonic test, the transition from high subsonic to low supersonic speeds, where many aircraft designs revealed their flaws. Jason leaned forward, watching the displays more intently. This was the critical phase. The fighter accelerated through Mach 0.9, approaching the sound barrier. Slight buffeting appeared on the telemetry, normal for this regime. But as the aircraft passed Mach 1.0, something changed. A vibration in the left wing, small at first but rapidly intensifying. "What is that?" The lead engineer pointed to a spiking graph line. "Torsional oscillation in the port wing." Jason was on his feet before conscious thought, moving to the front row for a better view of the displays. The pattern was familiar. He had seen it before in another aircraft, another time. Flutter. Not severe yet, but building toward a potentially catastrophic failure. "Get him to reduce speed," Jason said sharply. "Back below Mach 0.9. The test director glanced at him, hesitating at taking direction from someone outside the chain of command. Rebecca stepped forward. "Do it. Now." The order went out. Peterson acknowledged and began decelerating. But the oscillation continued, the amplitude increasing despite the reduction in speed. "It's not responding to speed change." The stress engineer's voice was tight with concern. "The flutter is self-sustaining." Jason studied the telemetry, mind racing through possibilities. If traditional methods weren't damping the oscillation, there had to be an external factor, something they hadn't accounted for in the simulations. "The fuel load," he said suddenly. "What's the current distribution?" A technician pulled up the fuel system display. "Standard configuration. Outer wing tanks at 85%, center tank at 60%. That's it. The weight distribution is amplifying the oscillation." Jason pointed to the fuel management controls. "Transfer fuel from the outer tanks to the center. Shift the mass inward to dampen the flutter." Again, the test director looked to Rebecca for confirmation. She nodded without hesitation. "Do as he says." The command was relayed. Peterson executed the fuel transfer. For several tense seconds, the oscillation continued unabated. Then gradually the amplitude began to decrease. The spike on the graph flattened. The vibration ceased. "Flutter neutralized," the telemetry officer announced. "Aircraft stabilizing." A collective exhale swept through the observation room. The test resumed, with Peterson adjusting fuel distribution for each test point based on Jason's insight. The remainder of the flight proceeded without incident, the prototype performing exceptionally well through its full performance envelope. When Peterson landed and taxied to the hangar, the observation room erupted in applause. The test had been successful despite the flutter incident, or perhaps because of it, as the solution would now be incorporated into the operational procedures. Jason remained in his seat as the room emptied, engineers and officials heading down to the hangar for the post-flight debrief. The adrenaline that had carried him through the crisis response was ebbing, leaving him drained and suddenly aware of how completely he had re-immersed himself in a world he had tried to leave behind. Rebecca approached, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "That was impressive. If you hadn't recognized the flutter pattern and identified the solution, someone else would have." Jason finished, unwilling to accept credit for simply doing what any experienced test pilot would have done. "Perhaps, eventually, but not before potential damage to the aircraft or risk to the pilot." Rebecca sat beside him, her corporate persona softening. "This is why we need you, Mr. Reed, not just for what you know, but for how quickly you can apply that knowledge when it matters most." Jason looked out at the tarmac where the prototype was being towed into the hangar intact, successful partly due to his intervention. For the first time in years, he had contributed to flight safety in a meaningful way. The satisfaction was undeniable. "I'll take the consultant position," he said finally, "but I have conditions." Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." "I want a flexible schedule that allows me to be there for Emma after school. I want to work primarily with the safety team, not just design. And I want to propose a community outreach program, educational opportunities for kids who wouldn't normally get exposure to aerospace." The last condition surprised even Jason himself. It had formed in his mind during the test flight, watching the engineers and technicians work together to solve problems, a community he had once belonged to now potentially accessible to a new generation. Rebecca considered his terms, then nodded. "The schedule and safety team focus are easily arranged. The outreach program would need board approval, but—" She paused, something shifting in her expression. "Actually, I think I can make that happen. My father always said investing in future talent was our responsibility, not just our interest." "Then we have a deal." Jason extended his hand, completing the transformation from janitor to consultant in a gesture as simple as it was profound. As they shook hands, Rebecca held his gaze. "Welcome back to the sky, Mr. Reed, even if your feet stay on the ground." The words echoed in Jason's mind as he left the observation room, heading toward the hangar where Peterson and the engineering team were gathered around the prototype. For the first time in years, he was walking toward an aircraft as a professional, not as the man who cleaned up after the professionals had gone home. It wasn't flying, it would never be flying again. But perhaps it was the next best thing, a way to stay connected to the sky without the physical abilities his injury had taken from him. A way to contribute. A way to belong. As he approached the hangar, Peterson spotted him and waved him over. "Reed, perfect timing. I was just telling them about that fuel redistribution call. Textbook solution to an in-flight emergency." "You've still got the touch." The engineers made space for Jason in their circle, including him naturally in their technical discussion. Questions were directed his way. His opinions were solicited and considered. It was a small thing, this professional courtesy, but after years of invisibility, it felt monumental. Later, as Jason prepared to leave, he found Rebecca in her office, already working on the paperwork for his new position. She looked up as he entered, her expression open in a way he hadn't seen before. "I've scheduled a meeting with the board tomorrow to discuss your community outreach idea. If you have any specific thoughts on structure or implementation, I'd like to include them in the proposal." Jason hesitated, then sat across from her desk. "It's not fully formed yet, but I keep thinking about kids like Emma, curious about flight, drawn to the sky, but without the resources or connections to pursue that interest. What if Skyward offered classes, workshops, simulator time, not just for recruitment, but for inspiration? A kind of Wings of Tomorrow program." Rebecca made a note on her tablet. "Focusing on underprivileged schools first, perhaps." "Exactly. Aviation changed my life, gave me purpose, direction, challenge. Even though I can't fly anymore, that impact remains." Jason paused, surprised by his own candor. "Every kid deserves a chance to look up and think, maybe I could do that." Rebecca's pen stilled. "My father would have liked that idea. He grew up poor in Appalachia, you know. His first exposure to aircraft was a crop duster that landed in a field near his home. The pilot let him sit in the cockpit, explain the controls. Dad said it was like a door opening in his mind, a way out, a way up." This glimpse of Charles Morgan's humble beginnings contrasted sharply with the titan Jason had known by reputation. It humanized him, connected father and daughter in a way that transcended corporate succession. "Then perhaps we honor his legacy with this program," Jason suggested. "The Charles Morgan Wings of Tomorrow initiative." Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she rarely displayed. "I think he would have been proud of that." She set down her pen, meeting Jason's gaze directly. "And I think he would have been glad to know you found your way back to aviation, even if by an unconventional path." As Jason left Skyward that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. He thought about the aircraft he would never again pilot, the sensation of flight he would never again experience firsthand. But for the first time in years, the ache of that loss was balanced by something new: purpose, contribution, belonging. He pulled out his phone and called Emma at Mrs. Kaplan's apartment. "Hey, Firefly, guess what? I took the job. I'm going to be helping design planes again." Her excited response filled his ear, a torrent of questions and congratulations. But it was her final comment that lingered after he hung up. "See, Daddy, I told you you'd find a way back to the sky." Out of the mouths of children, Jason thought, looking up at the darkening heavens. Not the way he had planned, not the way he had dreamed, but a way back nonetheless. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. Cameras flashed like lightning in the Skyward Aerospace press room, reporters jostling for position as Rebecca Morgan approached the podium. 6 months had transformed the company's trajectory. The military contract not only secured, but expanded, stock prices climbing steadily, industry confidence restored. Behind her stood the board of directors, their earlier skepticism replaced by cautious approval. Success had a way of retroactively validating even the most controversial decisions. Rebecca adjusted the microphone, her navy blue suit a departure from her usual severe black. "6 months ago, I took over this company determined to prove I was strong enough. I fired people who didn't meet my standards. I dismissed voices that didn't sound like power." She paused, letting the confessions settle over the surprised audience. "And I insulted a man who turned out to be the person who saved my father's life." The room fell silent, reporters leaning forward in their seats. This wasn't the script they had expected. Jason Reed is a hero, not because of the medals he refused, but because he chose to stay on the ground to raise his daughter, because he saved lives without needing credit, because he showed me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about who you lift up when you do. In the back of the room, Jason shifted uncomfortably in his borrowed suit, Emma beside him, clutching a program with both hands, her cast recently removed. The last 6 months had transformed their lives as thoroughly as it had changed Skyward. Jason's consultant position had quickly evolved into a full-time role as safety director, his expertise sought after by engineers and test pilots alike. The respect he had earned was reflected in his salary, allowing him to move Emma to a garden apartment closer to Skyward with a proper bedroom for a growing girl and no stairs to challenge his damaged back. Rebecca continued, her voice stronger now. "Effective today, I'm announcing the launch of the Charles Morgan Wings of Tomorrow initiative, a comprehensive education program that will provide aviation and engineering opportunities to underserved schools across Virginia. This program will be directed by Jason Reed, whose vision inspired its creation." Applause erupted, filling the room with a wave of sound. Reporters raised hands, questions flying, but Rebecca held up a palm for silence. "One more thing," she added, her voice cutting through the diminishing applause. "This foundation won't just bear my father's name. It will be funded by a significant portion of Skyward's profits every year. Because if we're going to build planes that touch the sky, we need to build people who remember why the sky matters." More applause, more questions. Rebecca stepped away from the podium, moving toward Jason and Emma at the back of the room. The reporters surged forward, microphones, extended questions overlapping. Jason instinctively moved Emma behind him, shielding her from the sudden attention. Rebecca reached them, creating a buffer between the press and Jason's daughter. "Mr. Reed will be available for questions shortly. Please give us a moment." As the reporters reluctantly backed away, Rebecca turned to Jason, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Sorry about that. I should have warned you they'd be interested in your story." "It's fine." Jason rested a hand on Emma's shoulder. "But I don't need a spotlight, Ms. Morgan. The program is what matters, not me." Rebecca studied him with newfound appreciation. 6 months of working closely had transformed their relationship from antagonistic to respectful, even friendly. She had come to value not just his technical expertise, but his steadiness, his integrity, his refusal to play corporate politics. In a world of people constantly reaching for more power, more recognition, more wealth, Jason Reed simply did his job and went home to his daughter. "The program needs a face," Rebecca countered, "someone the public can connect with. Your story, Air Force hero rebuilds his life, gives back to the next generation, that's compelling. It will help us secure additional funding partnerships with other companies." Jason's expression remained skeptical, but he recognized the strategic thinking behind her argument. The Wings of Tomorrow initiative was too important to hamstring because of his discomfort with publicity. "All right, but Emma stays out of the spotlight." "Agreed." Rebecca glanced down at Emma, who was watching the exchange with bright, curious eyes. Ready to see the new education center, they've just finished setting up the simulators. Emma bounced on her toes, excitement overriding her usual shyness around Rebecca. Can I try one? Dad says I'm a natural pilot. Of course you can. Rebecca's smile softened her normally angular features. Your father helped design the simulation program specifically for young students. Who better to test it than his inspiration? The ride to the education center took them through the Skyward campus past research buildings and testing facilities to a newly renovated structure near the main entrance. The building had once been a storage facility, but now gleamed with fresh paint and large windows. A sign over the entrance proclaimed, Charles Morgan Wings of Tomorrow Center, in bold lettering with a stylized wing logo beneath. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The cavernous space had been divided into specialized learning areas, a classroom section with desks facing interactive displays, a technical area with aircraft components for hands-on learning, a computer lab for design work, and most impressive, a row of flight simulators ranging from simple controls for younger children to sophisticated systems for advanced students. A small group of Skyward employees waited inside, including Marcus and several engineers who had become fixtures in Jason's new professional life. They applauded as Jason, Emma, and Rebecca entered, their genuine enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the polite corporate acknowledgement that Jason had expected. Marcus approached, tablet in hand. The first class is scheduled for next Tuesday. 20 students from Garfield Middle School. He showed Jason the roster, 80% from low-income households, just like we prioritized. Jason scrolled through the list, recognizing the demographics from his planning sessions. These were kids who might never have considered aviation as a career path, who might never have seen themselves as future engineers or pilots. Kids like he had been growing up in a blue-collar Pennsylvania town where the military had seemed the only path to the sky. Everything's ready. Jason looked around the center, mentally checking off the preparations they had made over the past months. Curriculum finalized, instructors trained, all equipment tested. Marcus grinned. We even have branded T-shirts for the students. Rebecca insisted. Jason glanced at Rebecca, who shrugged unapologetically. Children like to feel part of something special. The shirts helped create that sense of belonging. It was a small detail, but it reflected Rebecca's surprising instinct for the human element of the program, a side of her that had emerged gradually over their months of collaboration. The ruthless CEO was still present in the boardroom, still fierce in defense of Skyward's interests, but she had developed a more nuanced approach to leadership, one that valued people as more than just assets. Emma had already gravitated toward the simulators, examining the controls with the serious concentration she applied to all things aviation-related. Jason watched her run her fingers along the throttle, the gesture so familiar it made his heart ache. She had his instincts, his passion for flight. Perhaps one day she would have what he had lost, the sky itself. Dad, come see, it has all the real instruments. Emma waved him over, her excitement infectious. As Jason joined her at the simulator, Rebecca observed them from a distance, giving father and daughter space to share the moment. The relationship between them was something she had come to admire, perhaps even envy. Jason's entire world revolved around Emma's well-being, her happiness, her future. It was a kind of love Rebecca had never experienced, neither as a child nor as an adult. Charles Morgan had been many things, brilliant, driven, visionary, but warm was not among them. He had provided abundantly for Rebecca's material needs, while remaining emotionally distant, teaching her to value achievement over connection. Only now, watching Jason with Emma, did Rebecca begin to recognize what had been missing from her own upbringing. A Skyward executive approached, breaking her reverie. Ms. Morgan, the board members are asking about the budget allocation for the program. They've expressed some concerns. Rebecca's expression cooled. Despite the public announcement, certain board members remained skeptical about diverting profits to education rather than shareholder dividends. It was a battle she had been fighting since first proposing the initiative. Tell them I'll address their concerns at tomorrow's meeting, with a complete financial projection showing how this program will ultimately benefit Skyward through workforce development and public goodwill. Her tone made it clear the matter was not up for immediate discussion. As the executive retreated, Rebecca rejoined Jason and Emma, who had moved on to examining the aircraft components display. Emma held a control surface in her small hands, turning it to catch the light. This is an aileron, she explained to Rebecca with the solemn authority of a child sharing precious knowledge. It makes the plane roll like this. She tilted her hand to demonstrate. That's right. Rebecca nodded, genuinely impressed. You know a lot about aircraft for someone your age. Dad teaches me everything. Emma beamed up at Jason. He says understanding how things work means you're never really at their mercy. The phrase struck Rebecca with unexpected force. Understanding as power, as protection against vulnerability, it resonated with her own approach to life. But coming from this child passed down from her father, it held a different meaning. Not control for its own sake, but mastery as a path to freedom. The grand opening continued with a tour of the facility's discussions of curriculum and planning for the first classes. Throughout it all, Jason maintained a quiet pride in what they had accomplished, while Emma charmed everyone with her enthusiasm and surprising technical knowledge. By the time they prepared to leave, Rebecca had made a decision. Would you and Emma join me for dinner tonight? The invitation was spontaneous, outside the careful professional boundaries Rebecca normally maintained. To celebrate the launch, nothing formal, there's a good Italian place near my apartment. Jason hesitated, caught off guard by the personal nature of the invitation. Their working relationship had evolved into a mutual respect, occasional coffee meetings to discuss the program, but nothing approaching friendship. I appreciate the offer, but please, Dad, Emma tugged at his sleeve. Ms. Morgan saved me when I fell. We should say thank you properly. Jason looked down at his daughter, then back at Rebecca. Something had shifted between them over these months of collaboration. The CEO who had once mocked him was now a partner in creating something meaningful. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge that evolution. Italian sounds great. Thank you. The restaurant was warm and inviting with red-checked tablecloths and candles in wax-covered bottles. Nothing like the sleek, expensive establishments where Rebecca usually conducted business dinners. Emma's eyes widened at the basket of garlic bread placed before them, the promise of pizza to come. This is my favorite restaurant, Rebecca admitted as they settled into a corner booth. Not exactly what people expect from a CEO, but the food is honest. Jason relaxed slightly, surprised by this glimpse of Rebecca's personal preferences. Emma and I are pizza connoisseurs. We'll be the judges of that. Conversation flowed more easily than expected. The formal roles of CEO and employee softened by Emma's presence in the casual setting. They discussed the education program, the students who would benefit, the potential for expansion to other schools. Rebecca shared stories of her father's early career, his passion for aviation that had driven him to found Skyward. Jason offered glimpses of his time as a test pilot, edited for Emma's ears, but vivid with the thrill of pushing boundaries. What made you decide to become a pilot? Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led him to the Glory Squadron. Jason considered the question, his expression distant with memory. I was 10 when an Air Force demonstration team performed at our county fair. Watching those jets move through the sky like they were dancing, it was like seeing magic made real. I decided right then that's what I wanted to do. Never wavered. Like me, Emma interjected, sauce on her chin. I decided when I was 6, after Dad's first bedtime story about clouds that looked like mountains. Rebecca smiled at Emma's certainty, envying the clarity of her ambition. And what about you, Emma? What kind of pilot do you want to be? Test pilot like Dad was, flying planes for the first time when no one knows exactly what they'll do. Emma's eyes shone with the fearlessness of childhood. Dad says test pilots are the bridge between what engineers imagine and what pilots can actually fly. Jason wiped sauce from Emma's chin with a napkin, his expression a complex mixture of pride and concern. That's a tough road, Firefly. Test pilots have to be engineers as much as aviators. Then I'll be both, Emma declared with the simple confidence of an 8-year-old who had not yet discovered limitations. Rebecca watched their interaction, struck by the balance Jason maintained, encouraging Emma's dreams while gently introducing reality. It was so different from her own father's approach, which had emphasized achievement above all, with little room for dreams that didn't align with practical outcomes. You're lucky, Rebecca said quietly, to know so young what you want. I followed my father's path because it was expected, not because I chose it. And now, Jason studied her across the table. Is Skyward still just an obligation? The question was more personal than any he had asked before. Rebecca considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. It was at first. After my father died, I was determined to prove I could carry his legacy, that I was strong enough, smart enough, tough enough. I didn't really ask myself if it was what I wanted. And now, Jason repeated. Now. Rebecca looked between them, Jason with his quiet intensity, Emma with her open curiosity. Now I think I'm finding my own reasons to care about Skyward. The Wings of Tomorrow program is part of that, building something that matters beyond profit margins. The vulnerability of the admission hung in the air between them. Jason nodded, acknowledging both what she had said and what remained unspoken, the loneliness of her position, the weight of expectations she carried. They finished dinner with tiramisu for the adults and ice cream for Emma, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. When they parted outside the restaurant, Rebecca found herself unexpectedly reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for joining me," she said, watching as Jason helped Emma into their car. "It was nice to talk outside the office." Jason paused, one hand on the car door. "It was. Maybe we could do it again sometime." The suggestion hung between them, not quite personal, not strictly professional. A possibility neither had anticipated 6 months ago, when she had looked down from a catwalk and dismissed him as nothing more than a janitor. "I'd like that." Rebecca stepped back as they drove away, her worldview shifting yet again. Jason Reed had started as an employee, become a valuable asset, evolved into a respected colleague, and now, what a friend, perhaps. Someone who saw her as Rebecca, not just as CEO Morgan. The following week brought the first class of students to the Wings of Tomorrow Center. 20 middle schoolers from Garfield Middle School filed off a bus, their expressions ranging from nervous to excited as they entered the building. Jason waited to greet them, dressed casually in khaki pants and a polo shirt with the program logo. "Welcome to Skyward Aerospace," he began, once they had settled in the classroom area. "My name is Jason Reed. I used to fly experimental aircraft for the Air Force, and now I help design safer planes here at Skyward." The introduction captured their attention, especially the boys who had been fidgeting in the back row. One raised his hand. "Did you ever crash?" Jason smiled at the predictable question. "Once, ejected over the Nevada desert. That's why I don't fly anymore, injured my back in the ejection." He turned the potentially discouraging admission into a teaching moment. That's also why safety is so important in aviation. The work we do here at Skyward helps make sure pilots come home to their families. Another hand shot up, this one belonging to a girl with bright eyes and a serious expression that reminded Jason of Emma. "Can anyone learn to fly even if they're not rich?" The question cut to the heart of why Jason had proposed the program in the first place. Absolutely. Flying isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about dedication, learning, and a willingness to work hard. He surveyed the room, meeting as many eyes as possible. "That's why you're here, because the sky belongs to everyone who's willing to earn their place in it." The day progressed through basic aerodynamics lessons, hands-on exploration of aircraft components, and finally time in the simulators. Jason moved among the students, offering guidance, answering questions, watching for the spark of genuine interest that might indicate a future aviator or engineer. He found it in several students: the serious girl who had asked about accessibility, a quiet boy who absorbed technical information like a sponge, a pair of friends who worked together to master the simulator controls. By the end of the day, the initial nervousness had given way to enthusiasm, with students reluctant to leave when the bus returned. "Can we come back?" The serious girl, Melissa, according to her name tag, lingered as others filed out. "I've never flown in a real plane before, but I felt like I was really doing it in the simulator." "You'll be back every Tuesday for the rest of the semester," Jason assured her, "and if you stick with it, there might be opportunities for advanced programs later on." After the students departed, Jason remained in the center, reviewing notes on each participant, planning adjustments to the curriculum based on their responses. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Rebecca until she spoke from the doorway. "Successful first day." She crossed to his desk, looking genuinely interested in his assessment. "Better than expected." Jason gestured to his notes. Several showed real aptitude. One girl in particular reminded me of Emma, actually. Same intensity, same questions. Rebecca smiled, recognizing his parental pride. "I watched part of the session from the observation room. You're good with them. They respond to you. They respond to the subject matter. Flight has a way of capturing imaginations." Jason set down his pen, stretching his back carefully. "But thank you. It feels good to be teaching again." Again, Rebecca tilted her head, realizing there were still gaps in what she knew about him. You taught before, at the test pilot school for a while, instructed new pilots on experimental aircraft handling. The memory was bittersweet, another life he had left behind after his injury. I enjoyed it more than I expected to. Rebecca considered this new information. We could expand your role here. Beyond the middle school program, I mean. Skyward has relationships with several engineering schools, guest lectures, mentoring programs. One step at a time, Jason cautioned, though the idea held appeal. Let's make sure this program is solid before we branch out. Rebecca nodded, accepting his measured approach. It was one of the qualities she had come to value in their working relationship, his refusal to overextend to promise more than he could deliver. So different from the corporate culture of perpetual expansion she had inherited from her father. The board is meeting tomorrow to review the program budget, she said, changing the subject. I'd like you to present the initial results and future projections. Jason frowned. You know how the board feels about me, Rebecca. Former janitor, disability single parent. I'm not exactly their idea of executive material. Precisely why you should present. Rebecca's tone hardened slightly, her CEO persona resurfacing. They need to see you as I do, as an asset to Skyward, not a charity case or a PR move. The characterization stung even as Jason recognized its accuracy. Despite his title and responsibilities, certain board members still viewed his position as Rebecca's pet project, a sentimental decision rather than a strategic one. All right, he agreed finally, but I'm presenting as safety director, not as the former Glory Squadron pilot or Emma's dad. The program should stand on its educational merits, not my personal story. Rebecca nodded, respecting his boundary. 0900 tomorrow. Boardroom A. She turned to leave, then paused. And Jason, wear the blue tie. It projects confidence. The next morning found Jason in the executive wing, blue tie knotted precisely at his throat, presentation materials organized in a leather portfolio Rebecca had given him when he accepted the safety director position. The boardroom doors loomed before him, polished wood, concealing the skepticism he knew waited on the other side. He checked his watch. 0855. 5 minutes until he would face the group of men and women who controlled Skyward's financial decisions, the same people who had expected Rebecca to fail when she inherited the company. His pulse quickened slightly, an echo of pre-flight tension from his piloting days. Mr. Reed, the voice came from behind him, measured and professional. George Whitman, Skyward's CFO and one of the board members most skeptical of the Wings of Tomorrow program. Prepared to justify your budget. Jason turned, meeting the older man's assessing gaze without flinching. Prepared to discuss the program's value to Skyward in the community? Yes. Whitman's expression remained neutral, but his tone carried a hint of condescension. Community goodwill is difficult to quantify on a balance sheet, Mr. Reed. This board has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Education is an investment, not an expense, Jason countered evenly. One that pays returns measured in decades, not quarters. Before Whitman could respond, the boardroom doors opened and Rebecca emerged. Gentlemen, we're ready to begin. She nodded to Jason, a silent communication of support, then led the way into the room where the other board members waited. The presentation began formally with Jason outlining the program's structure, initial enrollment curriculum design, and early results from the first student cohort. He kept his delivery professional, focused on data rather than emotional appeals, conscious of his audience's priorities. The financial projections for years 1 through 5 are in your packets, he concluded, turning to the final page of his presentation, along with metrics for measuring success beyond simple ROI. Student engagement, academic improvement, community response, and Skyward recruitment potential. He paused, surveying the politely attentive faces around the table. Most showed neither opposition nor enthusiasm, simply the measured consideration of executives evaluating a business proposal. But there was something missing from his presentation, something that numbers and projections couldn't convey. Jason set down his pointer, moving away from the screen to address the board directly. What these figures don't show is what I saw yesterday. 20 kids who had never considered aviation as a possibility, suddenly realizing the sky was within their reach. One girl who had never been on an airplane mastering basic flight principles in a single afternoon. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. These aren't just potential future employees or positive PR. They're the next generation of innovators who will keep companies like Skyward at the cutting edge. If we want American aerospace to remain competitive, we need to invest in talent early and broadly, not just at elite universities or through traditional pipelines. The room was silent for a moment after he finished. Then Walter Chen, the oldest board member and a contemporary of Charles Morgan, spoke. My son was on United Flight 173 in '97, engine failure over Colorado. The pilot who landed that aircraft safely had trained in a program similar to what you're describing, an outreach initiative for underserved schools in Detroit. Chen's gaze moved to Rebecca. Your father understood the value of development pipelines, Ms. Morgan, not just for technology, but for people. I believe he would have supported this initiative. He glanced around the table. I move to approve the full 5-year budget as proposed. A second board member nodded agreement. Seconded. Rebecca, serving as chair, called for a vote. One by one, the board members indicated their positions. When the final tally came in 12 in favor, 2 opposed, Jason felt a tension release that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The program was secure, at least for the foreseeable future. As the meeting adjourned and board members filtered out, Rebecca remained seated, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Well done, Jason. You won over Chen, which means you won the room. His story about the pilot was that true. Jason gathered his materials, still processing the unexpected support. Absolutely. Walter rarely speaks about personal matters, but when he does, people listen. Rebecca stood smoothing her skirt. Your presentation was excellent, factual, strategic, forward-thinking, but it was when you went off script that you really connected. That passion is why I wanted you presenting instead of me. Jason hadn't considered that Rebecca's strategic thinking extended to his role as presenter. It was a reminder that beneath her evolving leadership style, she remained a calculated decision-maker. Thank you for the opportunity, he acknowledged genuine gratitude in his voice, and for pushing me to face them directly. It was good to be heard. They walked together toward the executive wing exit, their professional victory creating a momentary bond. Dinner again sometime, Rebecca suggested as they reached the lobby, to celebrate the budget approval. You could bring Emma. I'd like that, Jason agreed, surprising himself with how much he meant it. She's been asking when we'd see you again. I think you made quite an impression. Rebecca's expression softened, a vulnerability few at Skyward ever witnessed. She made quite an impression on me too. Her certainty about what she wants. It's remarkable. She gets that from her mother. A shadow of old grief crossed Jason's face. Amanda never doubted anything once she'd made up her mind, including marrying a test pilot against her parents' wishes. It was a rare mention of Emma's mother, a subject Jason typically avoided. Rebecca recognized the significance of him sharing even this small detail. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Jason's gaze turned inward for a moment, then refocused on the present. Friday night for dinner, there's a place near our new apartment with the best burgers in Virginia. Much more Emma's speed than Italian. Burgers sound perfect. Rebecca's smile reached her eyes, transforming her usually severe features. Text me the address. As they parted ways, Rebecca watched Jason walk toward the testing facility where his safety director duties awaited. 6 months ago, she had looked down on him from a catwalk, seeing nothing but a janitor. Now she saw the full measure of the man, his intelligence, his integrity, his quiet strength. The transformation in her perception was a measure of her own growth as much as his changed circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a message from the PR department press coverage of Wings of Tomorrow, overwhelmingly positive. 3 local news outlets requesting interviews with Mr. Reed. Rebecca smiled as she typed her response, forward request to Mr. Reed directly. His program, his decision. It was a small delegation of authority, but significant in a company where image control had always been centralized. Like everything involving Jason Reed, it represented a departure from how Skyward had operated under Charles Morgan. A new direction, a new legacy built on the foundation of the old. As she headed toward her office, Rebecca found herself looking forward to Friday's dinner with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business or networking. For perhaps the first time since taking the CEO position, she was pursuing a connection that had no strategic value, no corporate purpose, simply the pleasure of company she enjoyed. Jason Reed and his daughter were changing Skyward Aerospace in ways that went beyond wing designs and education programs. They were changing its leader one dinner conversation at a time. And that Rebecca was beginning to believe might be the most valuable transformation of all.